The mansion was quiet that night. Outside, the wind moved through the tall trees that surrounded the estate, and the city lights far in the distance blinked like tiny stars. Inside the great house, most of the staff had already gone to their quarters. The marble floors were polished, the silver laid out for the next day, and the air smelled faintly of lavender from the maids who had cleaned earlier. The billionaire walked slowly down the wide hallway, his mind heavy with thoughts from a long day of meetings. His life was filled with numbers, contracts, and endless demands. Yet, even with all his wealth, there was something missing, a silence in his heart that money never managed to fill. As he passed by the nursery, he noticed the faint glow of a nightlight. At first, he was going to continue walking, but something pulled him back. He gently pushed the door open, careful not to wake the baby. What he saw inside made him stop. The crib was there, the little child sleeping soundly with a small stuffed toy clutched in one hand. But his eyes were not drawn to the baby. His eyes went straight to the floor. There, curled up on a thin rug, lay the maid. Her body was folded awkwardly, one arm stretched toward the crib as if she had fallen asleep while patting the baby. She had no pillow beneath her head, no blanket covering her, just the hard floor and her own tired body as she slept beside the child. For a moment, the billionaire could hardly believe what he was seeing. He blinked, thinking perhaps she had simply come in to check on the baby and dozed off by accident. But then he noticed something else. Her shoes neatly placed by the wall, her hands still close to the crib, her breathing calm but shallow, like someone who had fallen asleep after waiting for hours. The image struck him deeply. She had her own small room at the far end of the house. There was no reason for her to be here, no reason to sleep on the hard floor when she had a bed of her own. Yet here she was, choosing to stay close to the baby rather than rest in comfort. It wasn't duty, he realized. It wasn't something written in her job description. It was something else, something far more powerful. The billionaire felt a tightness in his chest. For years, he had surrounded himself with people who worked for him, assistants, managers, advisors, staff. Most of them came and went, serving their role without attachment. But this was different. This was not an act of work. This was an act of heart. He stood in the doorway longer than he meant to, watching the way she breathed softly, the way the baby seemed more at peace with her presence nearby. He wondered how many nights she had done this before, how many times she had chosen to give up her own rest for the sake of the child. He thought of his own absence, the times when business trips or meetings had kept him away from the nursery. He thought of how quickly he had left the care of his child in the hands of others, never pausing to wonder what sacrifices they might be making. That night, something inside him shifted. He closed the door gently and walked back down the hall, but sleep did not come easily. Lying in his large, luxurious bed, he kept seeing that picture in his mind, the woman sleeping on the floor, the baby safe and calm in the crib. He tried to push it away, telling himself it was nothing, that perhaps she had been careless. But no, his instincts told him otherwise. It was not carelessness, it was devotion. The following day, the billionaire found himself distracted during meetings. His assistants handed him reports, and he nodded absently, but his thoughts drifted back to the night before. He couldn't stop thinking about it. When the day finally ended, he walked home not with thoughts of profits or deals, but with one single question. Why? Why would she do that? That evening, after dinner, he lingered around the nursery again. The maid was there, holding the baby gently and humming a soft tune. The baby looked up at her with eyes wide and trusting, completely calm in her arms. The billionaire stood by the doorway, unnoticed for a while, just listening. He realized she wasn't only caring for the baby physically, she was giving him love, warmth, and security. Things no amount of wealth could buy. Finally, he stepped into the room, and she turned, startled to see him. He asked her a simple question. Why were you on the floor last night? Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, She seemed unsure what to say. She lowered her gaze, adjusting the baby in her arms, and whispered, "He cries when left alone. I didn't want him to feel scared, so I stayed. I thought if he heard me nearby, he would sleep better." The billionaire didn't know how to respond. Her answer was so simple, yet it carried such weight. She hadn't done it because she was asked. She hadn't done it because she was told. She had done it because she cared. He nodded slowly, though inside he was shaken. Here. The next morning came with soft sunlight pouring in through the tall glass windows. The baby woke up smiling, babbling happily in his crib. The maid was already up, gently holding a small towel, wiping the baby's face and humming softly. She didn't expect anything in return. For her, caring for this baby had become more than just a job. It was something she felt deeply in her heart. Downstairs, the billionaire sat at his large dining table, looking out into the garden but seeing none of it. His mind was still stuck on the image from last night. The maid on the floor, the baby sleeping peacefully, the quiet sacrifice no one else had noticed. He didn't say much during breakfast. Even the butler, who usually offered the news or calendar for the day, noticed the difference in his mood. But no one asked, no one dared. Later that day, the billionaire canceled a few meetings. He said he was feeling unwell, but that wasn't true. What he needed was time to think, time to observe. So he stayed in the house, quietly watching from a distance. He started noticing things he never saw before, like how the maid always smiled when she walked into the nursery, no matter how tired she looked, or how she would carefully check the temperature of the baby's milk with her wrist before feeding, or how she talked to the baby with so much love in her voice, even though the child couldn't respond with words yet. This woman didn't just work in the house, she gave life to it. At lunchtime, while the staff gathered in the kitchen for a quick break, the billionaire stood quietly outside the door, listening. He heard laughter, the kind that only comes when people feel safe with each other. And right in the middle of it was the maid, telling a small story about how the baby had tried to talk that morning, making silly sounds. Everyone laughed, and for a moment, there was lightness in the air. The billionaire was surprised. His house, which often felt cold and formal, was warmer than he thought, and somehow this warmth started with her. He decided to talk to her again, not as an employer, not with instructions, just as a human being. So that evening, after the baby had fallen asleep, he gently knocked on the nursery door. She opened it, surprised to see him, but stepped aside to let him in. "I noticed you again last night," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You were awake every time the baby moved." She smiled, a little embarrassed. He's still small. Sometimes he just needs to know someone's nearby. He looked at her for a moment. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, genuinely curious. "This is your job, yes, but you go beyond that." She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she sat on the small chair beside the crib and spoke slowly. "I was raised by someone who worked hard but didn't have much," she said. "My mother cleaned homes to take care of us. She always told me, no matter what job you do, put your heart into it. That's where your worth lives, not in money but in how you care." The billionaire listened closely. Her words struck a chord. "I see a child who needs love," she continued. "Not just bottles and baths, real love, gentle touch, soft words. I give him what I can, not because I have to, but because I'd want someone to do the same if it were my child." For a moment, the billionaire couldn't speak. There were so many things he had overlooked, buried under wealth and business deals. He looked at the baby, who was now sleeping soundly with his tiny hand stretched toward the space where the maid usually lay. "You're right," he said finally. "I never really thought about it that way." She smiled again, a kind smile, then stood up and excused herself politely. She never once tried to make him feel guilty, never once asked for praise. She simply walked out and went on with her night. That conversation didn't just stay in his mind. It stirred something inside his heart. The next morning, instead of leaving early for meetings, the billionaire stayed. He followed his usual routine a little slower, paying more attention to the world around him. He noticed how the maid folded the baby's tiny clothes, always careful with every piece. He saw her write little notes about the baby's feeding times and what songs he liked most when upset. She even kept a small diary where she noted his first smile, his favorite toy, and the days he seemed to miss his father. Yes, she noticed when he wasn't around. And more than that, she made sure the baby didn't feel alone. Later in the week, the billionaire quietly asked the head housekeeper a question. "How long has she been doing this?" "Sleeping on the nursery floor?" the woman asked. "A few weeks now, sir. She started after the baby had a high fever one night. She was worried it might happen again." "And she never told anyone?" "No, sir. She just did it." The billionaire felt his chest tighten again. He remembered that night. He was out of town for a meeting. The house felt different after that day. Something had shifted in the air, and everyone could sense it. The billionaire's words in the main hall still echoed in the minds of the staff. They had always respected him for his wealth and power, but this time, they saw another side of him. A man capable of humility. A man who could recognize the quiet efforts of someone often overlooked. But no one was more surprised than the maid herself. She never asked for a new title, never expected to be spoken about in such a way. She only wanted to do her part, to care for the child in her charge. Yet here she was, standing taller, not because of pride, but because someone finally noticed the truth of her heart. That evening, when she entered the nursery, the baby reached out with his little hands, smiling at her the way he always did. She picked him up, kissed his forehead gently, and whispered, "You're safe." What she didn't realize was that the billionaire had followed quietly to the nursery doorway. He stood there, watching as she rocked the baby in her arms. His expression was softer than ever. It was as if for the first time he truly saw what family looked like. Not in wealth, not in power, but in the simple act of love. He stepped into the room. "You know," he said, his voice calm, "he smiles more with you than with anyone else." She turned slightly, embarrassed. Babies sense things. They know when someone loves them. The billionaire nodded. "Yes," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Something I'm still learning." The maid looked at him, a little surprised. He was always so confident, so certain. To hear him admit he was still learning, it made him human in her eyes. That night, the billionaire stayed in the nursery a little longer, not working on his laptop, not answering calls, just sitting in the chair near the crib, watching his son sleep. The maid quietly laid a blanket on the floor as she always did, preparing herself for another night of keeping watch. But the billionaire stopped her. "Not tonight," he said softly. "You don't have to sleep on the floor anymore." She froze, unsure what to say. "But if he wakes—" "I'll be here too," the billionaire interrupted gently. "We'll watch over him together." Her eyes widened. For the first time she saw not just a father, but a man trying to bridge the distance between himself and his child. She gave a small nod, and for the rest of that night, they both stayed near the baby, not as employer and employee, but as two people united by the same care. The next morning was filled with laughter. The baby woke up, saw both of them, and clapped his tiny hands with joy. The sound echoed through the room, soft yet powerful. It was as if the little one knew things were changing. Over the next few days, the billionaire started spending more time at home. Meetings that once seemed too important were now postponed or delegated. He made small efforts, but they mattered. He learned how to hold his son without making him cry. He learned that sometimes all a baby needed was a silly face to burst into giggles. And every step of the way, the maid was there, guiding quietly, never overstepping, but always ready to help. One afternoon, while the baby napped, the billionaire asked her to sit with him in the garden. They sat in silence for a while, the air fresh, the sound of leaves rustling above them. Finally, he spoke. "Do you ever think about your future?" he asked. She looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You've given so much here," he said, But what about your own dreams? She hesitated, unsure if she should answer, but his tone was genuine, so she spoke. I've always dreamed of studying childcare properly, to learn more to help children who don't have anyone. But life, she smiled faintly, life doesn't always follow dreams. Sometimes you just do what you can. The billionaire leaned back, thoughtful. And yet, you live your dream every day. You may not have the certificate, but you already do more than most professionals I've met. She lowered her eyes, humbled by his words. I only do what I know. Give love. That simple sentence stayed with him. He couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, he searched for programs in schools, places where someone like her could study if given the chance. It was the first time in a long time he thought about helping someone without expecting anything in return. Meanwhile, the baby continued to grow more attached to her. Whenever she entered the room, his tiny arms stretched out immediately. The bond between them was undeniable. The billionaire noticed it with both gratitude and a twinge of guilt. He wondered how much he had missed by being absent so often, how many moments had slipped away. One evening, as rain poured heavily outside, the baby woke crying. The billionaire rushed to the nursery, only to find the maid already holding him, rocking gently. Her calm voice soothed the baby within minutes. Wah! The days in the mansion began to change in a way no one had expected. What once was a place of silence and distance now started to feel warm and alive. The baby's laughter echoed through the long hallways, and with every sound of joy, the house felt less like a building and more like a home. The maid, who had once gone unnoticed, was now seen by everyone in a new light. The billionaire treated her with quiet respect, and even the other staff began to notice the shift. She was no longer just the one who cleaned and cared for the child in the background. She had become the heart of the household, the one who reminded everyone that love was stronger than wealth. But though things seemed better, the billionaire was not fully at ease. He was still learning how to be a father, and with every new attempt, he realized how much he had missed. Often at night, when the baby slept, he would walk through the nursery in silence and ask himself, why didn't I try earlier? Why did I let so much time pass? One evening, while the baby lay asleep and the rain tapped gently on the windows, the billionaire sat in the study. His thoughts were heavy. The maid walked in quietly to bring him some tea, as she often did. She noticed his expression and asked softly, something on your mind? He hesitated. Then he spoke with honesty he rarely shared. I was never prepared for this life. I thought money could give me everything. But standing here as a father, I realize I don't know how to measure the things that truly matter. The maid placed the tea on the table and sat across from him. Her voice was calm but steady. No one is fully prepared. Parents learn by doing. Even the mistakes you make, if they come from love, they become lessons for both you and the child. Her words comforted him more than she knew. He looked at her, realizing that though she had far less in life, she had wisdom money could never buy. The next morning, he made a decision. For the first time in months, he canceled an important business trip. His advisors protested, saying he couldn't afford to step away, but the billionaire was firm. My son needs me more than another deal. The maid noticed the change. She saw him spending mornings with the baby, sometimes struggling but always trying. He read children's books aloud, even if his voice was awkward at first. He pushed the stroller in the garden, laughing when the baby squealed at the sight of butterflies. There were mistakes, yes. Sometimes the baby cried in his arms, and the billionaire looked helpless. But instead of walking away as he might have in the past, he stayed. And each time, the maid guided him gently, showing him what to do without judgment. Their bond as two caregivers grew deeper. The billionaire began to trust her not just with the baby, but with his thoughts. He often asked her questions, not about work, but about life. One afternoon, they sat in the garden while the baby played nearby on a blanket. The billionaire asked, "Why do you stay so devoted? You could find an easier job, one with less responsibility." She smiled faintly. "Because love isn't measured in how easy something is. This child, He gives me joy. He reminds me that no matter how difficult life becomes, there is always a reason to keep going. Her answer struck him. He realized she wasn't serving for money or duty alone. She was there because her heart was tied to the child's happiness. That kind of loyalty couldn't be bought. It had to be earned, and it had to be given freely. In the evenings, the mansion staff began to notice changes in the billionaire as well. He spoke more kindly, smiled more often, and even remembered small details about their lives. It was as if the warmth of the nursery had spread throughout the house. But as everything grew brighter inside, a shadow appeared outside. Rumors began to spread in the city. Some whispered that the billionaire had become distracted, softer, no longer focused on his empire. Rivals sensed weakness. A few of his close associates tried to warn him that his decisions to spend more time at home were bad for business. One evening, during a dinner with investors, a sharp-tongued guest mocked him openly. "So the great billionaire now spends his days changing diapers? Perhaps we should look elsewhere for leadership." The room laughed lightly, but the words cut deep. The billionaire forced a smile, but inside he burned. Later that night, he sat alone, doubting himself again. Was he failing his responsibilities as a leader by choosing fatherhood? The maid found him sitting in the dark study, staring at the city lights through the window. She asked gently, "Why are you here alone?" He sighed heavily. "They say I'm weak, that I've lost focus. Maybe they're right." She stepped closer, her voice calm but strong. "Weakness is turning away from love. Weakness is hiding behind money because you're afraid to feel. But you..." She looked directly into his eyes. "You're learning to..." Time moved forward, but the bond between the three of them, the billionaire, the maid, and the baby, only grew stronger. What had started as an unexpected moment of compassion had now become the very foundation of their lives. The mansion was no longer a cold space filled with wealth and silence. It had turned into a place where laughter echoed, where tiny footsteps ran across the marble floors, and where two adults, so different in background, learned that love and kindness could change everything. The maid's routine changed too. She was no longer just the quiet helper who went unnoticed. Now she was treated as part of the family. The billionaire would ask for her opinion on things beyond childcare. Sometimes it was simple, like what food to prepare for the baby. Other times it was bigger, like whether to attend another business meeting or spend the day at home. Slowly, she realized that he valued her voice, something she had never experienced in her life before. But the biggest change came when she started her classes. True to his word, the billionaire enrolled her in a childcare program. At first, she was nervous. She hadn't been in a classroom for years. She worried about fitting in with the other students. She worried about failing. But every evening when she returned home to the mansion, the baby would reach for her, giggling with joy, and the billionaire would ask about her day. Their encouragement gave her strength. One night, she returned home exhausted from studying, her hands full of books. She sat down at the kitchen table, her head heavy. The billionaire walked in and noticed her struggle. "Too much?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. I keep thinking of all the children who don't have someone to protect them. If I can make even a small difference, it will be enough." He looked at her with quiet admiration. "You're stronger than you think. You've already made the biggest difference in my son's life, and in mine." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of her long days didn't feel so heavy anymore. Meanwhile, the baby was growing fast. His first words filled the house with joy. The first time he called Papa, the billionaire was so overwhelmed that he picked him up and spun him around the room, tears forming in his eyes. Later, when the baby reached for the maid and called her Mama, there was a moment of silence. The maid froze, her hands trembling. She looked at the billionaire nervously, unsure how he would react. But instead of anger, he smiled warmly. "He sees love," he said softly. "That's all that matters." Those words stayed with her. She had never imagined being seen as a mother figure. She had only wanted to care for the child because he deserved love. But now, she realized that the child's innocent heart had given her a place in his life she hadn't expected. Not everyone outside the mansion understood this bond, though. Whispers spread in the city, stories about the billionaire becoming too close to a maid, questions about whether he had lost focus on his empire. There were rumors that his rivals were plotting to take advantage of his softer side. One evening, a trusted advisor came to him in private. "You need to be careful. People are talking. They say you're distracted. They say you're letting your emotions control you. If you're not careful, you could lose everything you've built." The billionaire listened quietly. Then he said firmly, "If being a father and treating someone with respect means I lose everything, then maybe what I built wasn't worth keeping." The advisor left speechless. That night, when the billionaire shared this with the maid, she looked at him with surprise. "You would risk it all?" she asked. He nodded. "For too long, I thought my empire was my legacy, but I was wrong. My legacy is him." He pointed upstairs, where the baby slept peacefully. "And the kindness that keeps him safe." Tears filled her eyes. She realized then that this man, once known only for his wealth, had been transformed into someone who valued love above all. Months passed, and her studies began to bear fruit. She excelled in her classes, often staying up late to complete assignments. She even started helping other students who struggled. One of her teachers told her, "You don't just study this, you live it. That's why you're going to be extraordinary." At graduation, the billionaire and the baby attended quietly, sitting in the back. When her name was called and she walked across the stage, she looked out and saw them both clapping. The baby waved his little hands in excitement. In that moment, all her struggles felt worth it. After the ceremony, the billionaire handed her a small box. Inside was a simple necklace with a tiny heart pendant. "For everything you've done," he said quietly. "A reminder that love is stronger than anything else." She held it close, unable to find words. But life was not only about celebrations. Challenge,